Welcome to the 28 Storms Tropical Weather Update for this Tuesday, July 26th. We've been monitoring 90L Invest, a tropical wave that's come off the African coast within the last 10 days. We've been tracking this thing all the way across the central Atlantic, and now today it's just to the south of the Cuban coastline. And the last 2 days it's looked rather pathetic, with it being elongated from west to east across much of the greater Antilles. But over the last 24 hours, we begin to see an increase in organization once again, as it's begun to move away from land. And now the National Hurricane Center gives this a medium 30% chance of development into a tropical cyclone within the next 48 hours. This will be covered extensively throughout today's video. And just really quickly, if we look into the Eastern Pacific, there's nothing out there. So the main focus, once again, is on 90L Invest. This was the early morning surface plot from the Tropical Analysis Forecast branch. There's our tropical wave in question across much of the western Caribbean. The rest of the Atlantic Basin is looking fine today. There are a couple tropical waves out there in the central Atlantic, but none are showing signs of development. If we look at the overall satellite view, we see that the only game in town is 90L, just to the south of Cuba. We do have a lot of disorganized shower and thunderstorm activity along the Gulf Coast, but that's mainly related to a mid to upper level trough, which is not tropical in nature. So if we zoom in toward the Isle of Youth, you'll notice that 90L has become much better defined. Just yesterday, convection was stretched out all the way from Puerto Rico to Cuba. Now it's concentrated here just to the south of the Cuban coastline. We see a lot of cyclonic rotation here, but there's no confirmed surface circulation. Obviously, we don't have the hurricane hunters flying into the storm just yet. There's also a lack of surface observations, and we haven't had a good ASCAT satellite pass in the latest 24 hours. But nonetheless, this is coming together a little bit more than yesterday. Also, if we see the latest infrared, convection is developing in close proximity to where any low-level center would be located. However, the convection is not overly intense at this time, and it is still somewhat disorganized in nature. But as this moves off toward the west and west-northwest, we'll continue to monitor whether that convection continues to persist, especially in the overnight hours. And if that is the case, then we could have some tropical trouble on our hands. Now, take this microwave satellite pass for what it's worth. This was taken in the early to mid-morning hours, and we do see somewhat of an increase in low-level banding features to the east of any potential center. Any potential center would be located somewhere up around here, but nothing overly well-defined just yet. Now, one other thing that is promising for the potential future of this tropical system is the latest 850 millibar vorticity is showing an increase or a vorticity max here just to the south of the Cuban coastline, which is a good indication that this tropical entity is trying to do something. It's trying to get its act together little by little. And the latest SIMS wind shear analysis indicates that upper level winds are very light near the current location of our tropical system. Wind shear values are generally less than 10 knots. And if we look off toward the central Gulf of Mexico, you will notice that there is a lot of strong vertical wind shear. However, this is a fluid pattern, and by the time the tropical system moves into the central Gulf, this will more than likely have changed. Also, if we change sources, this will tell you what's going on a little bit better here. There is an upper level low located along the northern half of the Bay of Campeche, and that's what's really enhancing the wind shear over the central Gulf. Now keep in mind the wind shear is out of the east in this situation because there's a fairly potent mid to upper level ridge over the central United States, and that combined with the upper level low over the southern Gulf is really increasing those mid to upper level easterly winds over in this particular region. But that upper level low is also helping to ventilate the atmosphere here a little bit over the northwest Caribbean, which of course is where our tropical system is located. And this upper level low could help to ventilate our tropical wave throughout its life cycle or duration as it continues to move on into the Gulf of Mexico. Now this is the water vapor representation of what I'm talking about. Once again, here is that weak mid to upper level low located here over the southwest Gulf and upper Bay of Campeche. The mid-level ridging that has been causing the extreme heat wave over the central United States is dangling across the northern Gulf of Mexico. So in between these two mid to upper level features, we have a lot of easterly wind shear, but then just to the east of this upper level low, we have a fairly divergent pattern aloft, which is the reason why we're seeing an increase in convection here to the south of the Cuban coast. Now, if all things remain the same and this tropical wave moved into this current environment, then it would be quickly shredded to pieces over the Gulf of Mexico. But this upper level low is forecast by all the dynamical models to begin drifting off toward the west into the Tampico region, and that's going to help continue to ventilate the overall area in front of this tropical wave as it moves toward the west. So the upper level conditions should be somewhat favorable for development across the central Gulf. Now, this is the 12Z 300 millibar forecast from the GFS model. Usually I show you 850 so that we can track tropical waves better, but this is more toward the mid and upper levels. And right here is where we can see the presence of that mid to upper level low, and look what happens to it over the coming days. It begins to move on off toward the west. So what does this mean in terms of the shear forecast? Well, as I advance this just a little bit, you'll notice that the upper level low is being accurately depicted by the GFS forecast model. And look at what happens to the small pocket of favorable upper level winds aloft here over the coming 2 to 3 days. It begins to expand into the central Gulf of Mexico. We're now looking at 48 hours. That upper level low is now located near Mexico City and off into the central and western Gulf. We see very little wind shear aloft here as that mid to upper level ridge that's currently over the northwest Caribbean begins to spread west. Now, despite the favorable upper level conditions the models are outlining, they've still yet to show any development, and I'm talking about the global dynamical models, of course. Now, we're going to switch gears. This is the 850 millibar vorticity forecast from the GFS, so if it were to develop the system into anything, you would more than likely see a spike in the vorticity. But the problem is that if you recall the latest SIMS 850 millibar vorticity chart, we see that there was a spike here to the south of Cuba, and look what the model has. Really not a whole lot down there, and that could be the potential reason why none of the global models are showing this. Much like with Tropical Storm Brett when it developed in the western Atlantic, many of the models had a hard time even recognizing that a tropical disturbance existed down there toward the Bahamas. Anyway, if I advance this, you'll see that the model does not even see our tropical system in question. It keeps much of the Gulf of Mexico quiet, which is more than likely an incorrect solution. The initial depiction by the 12Z CMC is a little bit more realistic. It at least has a 850 millibar vorticity max near the Isle of Youth, as we can see right here. And the model simply doesn't show any development. It does take it along the northern half of the Yucatan coastline. And now this is by day 3 or 72 hours. So this is Friday morning because this is a 12Z model run. And it's got it making landfall just to the south or near Corpus Christi, Texas, with no development. No Gaps is not a very dependable model, but it does accurately depict at least a weak vorticity max where it should. And as this advances, we see that by 72 hours, so once again Friday morning, it takes the track a little bit more toward the upper Texas coast toward Houston and Galveston, but once again with no development. The 12Z EC-MWF model has a slightly different take on things. It still has the vorticity max down here, but if we look at the forecast track, it takes it more off toward Brownsville, Texas here by Friday morning with a very open wave axis, no development whatsoever as it begins to spread into the Mexican-US border. Now, if we look at the latest spaghetti plot of the tropical models, we see that the overall consensus also takes this in the general direction toward the middle Texas coast near Corpus Christi. So obviously this is a feature that Texas should be paying close attention to. We don't foresee that this is going to be anything major. In fact, there's still a fairly good chance that nothing will develop out of this and it will only come in as a tropical wave and possibly enhance your shower activity a little bit this weekend. But at the same time, there's obviously still some potential for a tropical depression or tropical storm to form. So just keep an eye on the weather for the remainder of the week. Also, this is a quick look at the 12Z GFS Ensemble model spread, and many of the GFS Ensemble members take this closer to Houston and Galveston. So as of right now, many of the models are toward the central and northern Texas coastline, whereas the European is actually the outlier with taking this more toward the south toward Brownsville. The European model is usually our best model, but every model has its bad day, and you like to go with the consensus as much as possible. So right now, I would still go with the middle Texas coast. Now, as stated, none of the dynamical models show any development whatsoever, but if we look at the latest spread from the tropical intensity models, we see that there are several members that do take this toward a moderate and upper end tropical storm within the next 72 hours. Now, they may be slightly overdoing the current structure and organization of this disturbance, but I think a compromise somewhere between the tropical model intensity estimates and the estimates from the dynamical models is in order. I think the intensity tropical models are overdoing this just a little bit, but at the same time, I don't believe that the global models are fully depicting our system either. And just to show you the overall steering mechanisms, we're looking at the current GFS 500 millibar chart for much of North America here, and we see that there is a mid to upper level ridge located or centered near northern Texas and southern Oklahoma, But look what happens over the next 2 to 3 days. By 66 hours, we see that the ridging has shifted or oriented itself more toward the east coast of the United States. We see a 594 DM ridge here along the east coast, and that's going to set up a slight weakness here along Texas for this to be drawn up toward the north just a little bit more. And just the strength of that ridge and the position of it along the east coast is going to determine exactly where this comes inland. Now, before I let viewers go, I just wanted to reiterate that the rest of the Atlantic Basin is quiet today. There's no features that overly stand out. The models don't show any imminent development elsewhere, and the same can be said for the Eastern Pacific, although toward the 4 to 6 day period, we may have to start watching here toward the far Eastern Pacific. Some of the models, more specifically the GFS and CMC, are developing our next tropical storm, so that'll be the next area of focus. But over the next 3 days, we'll be closely watching the Gulf of Mexico as that tropical wave begins to move through. We'll just have to see on satellite imagery whether or not this tropical wave begins to take more advantage of the favorable upper-level conditions it's being dealt with. None of the dynamical models show any development, but they are showing a favorable picture. So I advise everyone along the Texas coast to keep an eye on this. No reason to be overly concerned because at the most it looks like we'll be dealing with a tropical storm. And best case scenario is that it comes in as nothing more than a tropical wave and gives you some much needed rainfall. But as of right now, it looks like the greatest moisture and shower activity will be coming through Friday evening. So that's the timetable as of right now. And we'll have another update for you guys no later than early tomorrow morning. So stay tuned to 28storms.com for the latest information.